I did for me what is an unusual thing, something that I only do, that I'm required to do on the high holidays, submit a title for the topic of the sermon for the service sheet. But as I was writing this, I went back to the very front in my Word document and wrote the following in terms of what I'm calling this: explaining Zionism yet again and even to myself. And then in parens, and apologies in advance for a sermon that may be too long. The headline-sized title of Benjamin Moser's op-ed in last Sunday's Washington Post was, "Anti-Zionism isn't the same as anti-Semitism." He then proceeds to give a history of the controversies and opposition that Zionism created within the Jewish world from the late 19th century to the rise of Nazi Germany. We at Micah know this history well, and we've discussed it here many times, as our own Reform Judaism, both in Europe and the United States, was anti-Zionist. I spoke about this extensively and quoted from Reform Jewish documents in my Rosh Hashanah sermon just a few months ago. That's an invitation for you to go to the website and read that sermon. Moser, of course, also covers the anti-Zionism of the Orthodox, who are also very slow to come on board the Zionist movement. The only Orthodox rabbi of note to support Herzl's first Zionist conference is Rabbi Tzvi Moliver. Moser is correct. The anti-Zionist voices within world Jewry were many and strong. They largely disappeared after 1945. Largely, but not entirely. Moser gives short shrift and in fact ignores modern Israel's greatest political Zionist spokesman, one of modern Israel's greatest writers, Amos Oz, who died just over 5 years ago at the too young age of 79. Too young because we still need his voice today. And I could go on and give it another entire talk about this, about Amos Oz, who so many people wanted to categorize as a cultural Zionist, but Oz always insisted, "I'm a political Zionist." Moser summarizes his anti-Zionist position in 2 sentences. Anti-Zionism, writes Moser, quote, is a rejection of the idea of ethnic nationalism. It is a rejection of the idea of citizenship tied to race, end of quote. Now, I have cited Ozer's response many times over the years, increasingly over the last number of months. For me, Oz is a great restatement of Herzl, the founder, as I said, of what we call political Zionism, the notion that a Jewish state is the only answer to anti-Semitism. So now I'm going to invite you to turn your attentions to the screens, where hopefully by the magic of a working technology, you'll be able to see the Amos Oz quote that truly, truly captures me. Hopefully this is working. Here it is. "I would be happy," Oz wrote, "I would be more than happy to live in a world composed of dozens of civilizations, each developing in accordance with its own internal rhythm, all cross-pollinating one another, without anyone emerging as a nation-state. No flag, no emblem, no passport, no anthem, no nothing. Only spiritual civilizations tied somehow to their lands, without the tools of statehood and without the instruments of war." But the Jewish people has already staged a long-running one-man show of that sort. The international audience sometimes applauded, sometimes threw stones, and occasionally slaughtered the actor. No one joined us. No one copied the model the Jews were forced to sustain for 2,000 years, the model of a civilization without the tools of statehood. For me, this drama ended with the murder of Europe's Jews by Hitler. I am forced to take it upon myself to play the game of nations with all the tools of statehood, even though it causes me to feel, and I've said this so often, I love this, as George Steiner put it, like an old man in a kindergarten. People have asked me, what does that mean, an old man in a kindergarten? An old man knows that life is not about playing with blocks. An old man knows that. We know you can have a great literature, a great philosophy, a great culture, a great music with no country at all, with no state. We know that. We did that for 2,000 years. But to play the game with an emblem and a flag and a passport and an army, even war, provided that such war is an absolute existential necessity, I accept those rules because existence without the tools of statehood is a matter of mortal danger, but I accept them only up to this point. This is, for me, O's a great, great two-paragraph restatement of what Herzl's about. I agree with O's, how can we not, about the world being a dangerous place for Jews? History has proven that beyond a reasonable doubt. You don't have to read the Passover Haggadah's line, V'hisha amda lavotenu v'lanu, omdim aleinu l'chalotenu. In every generation they have risen up to destroy us. Just read any section, any paragraph, any page of Jewish history. So after World War II, the world body known as the United Nations instituted an affirmative action program for world Jewry through the partition plan adopted in 1947, which allowed for the creation of the State of Israel. And I use the contemporary term affirmative action deliberately, because what is affirmative action except creating policies and a legal structure whereby those groups of people who have been harmed by deliberate and structural societal persecution will now be affirmatively assisted in order to overcome the discrimination or the murder they have endured for generations. To be anti-Zionist, therefore, for me, is to be against affirmative action. The theory behind them, as I see it, is one and the same. I am pro-affirmative action, and I am a Zionist. This brings me to further delve into Moser's critique. We know that there are too many to count ethnic national states, including most of Europe. And so we can ask ourselves, how many ethnic national states have, like Israel, something akin to a law of return? That if you can show your ethnic lineage, you can gain automatic citizenship. My very limited research in this past week, and I was very preoccupied getting a deluge of mail for so many fans, causing me to say to my friend in Chicago, I would retire every month if I knew this was happening. But my limited research tells me the following. Armenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Finland, Germany, Hungary, Ireland, Malaysia, Serbia, and Turkey all have laws of return where you can become a citizen of the state by showing your lineage. Israel is not alone. And there are probably others. How much research can you do? Well, some person can do a lot, but I had a deadline for Shabbat. My guess is that Mr. Moser against all of these countries. In discussing this with a friend, he simply said, let the world form a line that ends all ethnic national states, and Israel can enter the line in last place. In terms of Israel's law of return, established in 1950, 2 years after statehood, there are, to be sure, some particular challenges. How does Israel decide who is a Jew and who therefore is eligible to the granting of its citizen benefits? The case of Brother Daniel points out the challenges, and just to summarize very, very quickly the very famous Brother Daniel case. According to Israel's law of return, anyone born to a Jewish mother or converted to Judaism by a rabbi, including for overseas rabbis, non-Orthodox, in Israel only Orthodox conversions are recognized. So anybody who is converted overseas or can show Jewish lineage, a Jewish mother, they can be granted automatic citizenship upon entering Israel. But what about people who were born Jewish who had converted to another religion? This is the famous Brother Daniel case. Brother Daniel was hidden during the Holocaust in a monastery. He converted to Catholicism when he grew up and then became a Carmelite monk. In 1959, he moved to Israel, motivated by his Jewish birth, but a practicing Catholic, a Carmelite monk, and he sought to claim citizenship under the laws of return. He was denied this citizenship by the Ministry of Interior. He appealed this case to the court system. The case was heard by the Israeli Supreme Court, who also denied him the right of citizenship under the law of return. Their ruling said that someone who converted to another religion could not be considered Jewish in the common parlance. Decision that perhaps makes sense. The noted and much quoted in these parts, for those who come a lot, Israeli philosopher Avishai Margalit disagreed with the court decision and made what he himself called an outrageous argument against it. As Michael Walzer, another much quoted thinker in these parts, summarizes Margalit, quote, "The idea of Israel as a refuge is the only defensible rationale for the law of return," end of quote. No person should be turned down by the state of Israel who would have been persecuted by the Nazis. That was Margalit's argument. I agree with it 1,000%. For Margalit, therefore, Jewish status for purposes of the law of return and Israeli citizenship must be determined by anti-Semites. It's a very, very, very unusual way to think, but it makes total sense. Margalit wrote in his great essay on this, quote, "The long history of Jewish persecution with no sure refuge anywhere on earth morally requires Israel to offer Jews everywhere an unconditional asylum. If you are a Jew in the eyes of Nazis, you are entitled to citizenship in Israel." How can you argue with that? The court system in Israel still has it wrong, in my opinion. I see this as an underscoring of Amos Oz, of what Oz is about. If the world is a dangerous place because they consider you to be Jewish, you have a place here. This, for me, is a definitive defense of Zionism in Israel. I also consider this to represent a kind of moral obligation for Israel to be open to the best of their abilities to refugees from other countries. It is the way to do honor to the affirmative action through which the state was created. Just over 40 years ago, Israel, a model of this, as they were one of the first countries to take in refugees, the so-called boat people fleeing Vietnam following the collapse of the South Vietnamese government in 1975. Israel is a model of this. Israel is a model. They took in many, many, many boat people, and you can go to Israel today and see their descendants. They speak fluent Hebrew. It's fantastic. In more recent years, Israel's record with refugees from Eritrea and South Sudan has been spotty at best and sometimes even disgraceful. But there is more here to consider, because my Zionism is not only the Zionism of Herzl and Amos Oz, it is also the Zionism of Echad Ha'am. And here too I wonder if Mr. Moser might consider how his own thinking is shaped. Here it's going to get a little more subtle. Echad Ha'am, a Russian Jew of the late 19th, early 20th century, who died in Tel Aviv in 1927, he lived the last 5 years of his life in pre-state Palestine, was not enamored about the creation of a state, but he was a brilliant Zionist. Echad Ha'am envisioned and desired a Jewish cultural center. For Echad Ha'am, the diaspora was a spiritual disaster, and he's sometimes called the agnostic rabbi. He was not at all a religious Jew, but he was deeply spiritual in terms of what a person's human spirit is about. Culture is created by the internal workings of the spirit. For him, the diaspora was a spiritual disaster for Jews because we regarded ourselves as an other, a perpetual outsider to the host country where we lived. We were forever a guest or foreigner. As such, Echad Ha'am wrote and thought, we could not help but view ourselves through the eyes of the people amongst whom we lived. This is the burden of being a minority. If you're a minority, you view yourself through the cultural prism of the culture you live in. This is Echad Ha'am's belief. His thinking about being a Jew in Europe rings with the writings of W.E.B. Du Bois about the experience of being black in this country. It's fascinating. And they lived, Du Bois lived much, much longer, but both late 19th, early through the 20th century. I thought of Achad Am Zionism, actually, when I read Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, and the feeling of liberation that Ta-Nehisi Coates describes feeling when he arrived as a student on the campus of Howard University, where being in a thick, black, vibrant culture, he sees the world differently. This is what Achad Am is thinking as a victim of anti-Semitism in Zionist Russia. The ability to see ourselves through our own eyes is sometimes an aspiration for which minorities are unaware until we experience it. I think that we American Jews experience what Achad Am saw and felt, especially perhaps we who consider ourselves on so many issues to be of the progressive liberal side of the dial. We look at the pain and suffering in Gaza and are horrified. Our people are doing this? On this, I am with Mr. Moser, and I am no less pained by Mr. Moser. I can't sleep many nights. I cannot tell you how many nights since the middle of October I'm waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and this is all I'm thinking about. Then I obsessively go, as soon as it kind of becomes 6 o'clock, I'm tossing and turning, and then I go immediately to start reading Israeli news media. But then I perhaps then look at the left's total condemnation of Israel, and I look at it, and I see what I see of the left. It's as if October 7th never happened. As if Hamas is fighting a war for Palestinian independence. As if rape and hostage-taking of senior citizens and infants is simply sound military tactics. As if the fascist ideology of Hamas matters not a whit. As if Israel is not fighting a war for its very survival. And an end to this war leaving Hamas in power in Gaza is totally acceptable. This is what it is for the left. We then wonder, I wonder, are they right? Maybe, perhaps. Are they right? Because these are the people that I identify with on so many ways, on so many issues that are vital to the future of my country. The people who are bashing Israel are my friends. Gay rights, I'm with them. Abortion rights, yes. Minority rights, yes. Voting rights, yes. Public education, yes. Affirmative action, yes. Immigration, yes. Democracy, yes. All of a sudden, on this one, whoa. So how can I not be culturally influenced by these people who I like everything that they think? And then on this is what we live. Are they right on Israel? I am unable to stand with them on Israel. No. I think about this daily. I'm consumed with it moment by moment. I said to one of the smartest people I know, if you're not going back and forth on Israel every day, I don't know. And he says, of course you're going back and forth on Israel every day. You're an intelligent person. How can you not be? And I think of Henry Zapruder, Alav HaShalom, who once wrote me a letter after a high holiday sermon I gave, and he said, always cherish your doubts and leave your mind open to another opinion. I saved that letter. This war is horrible. The suffering in Gaza is real. And Israel also faces what I believe to be an existential threat. A country with no borders is no country. If no Israeli feels safe living on the Gaza border, the country is in effect no longer a country. Hamas has made its intentions clear. It will seek to attack again and again. Achad Am speaks to me. To be in the diaspora is to look at yourself through the eyes of others. I live with this, but I always have to be piercing through that and realize what Achad Am is saying to me and stick with my own moral convictions. I therefore believe that the American Jewish Zionist left must mount in the most unified and muscular way that we can two unrelenting cries. One, we say with Israelis, save the hostages, bring them home now. The war must prioritize rescuing the hostages among all else. We must keep fighting this war and fight to redeem the hostages. And two, we must say to Israel and anyone who will listen anywhere and everywhere, including in this own city, in the power halls of Congress and everywhere, Netanyahu and his despicable government must be brought down, and the sooner the better. The Israeli left is unable to do this. They are preoccupied with winning a war. They support this war. They do not have the strength to take on toppling this government. This is our task, to do everything we can to oppose this Netanyahu government. Now, Netanyahu is a man that is anything but trustworthy, and his government is a government of Jewish thugs, anarchists, authoritarians, religious zealots, and messianic fanatics. We cannot see what is happening clearly while this government stands. There must be a government now that has a sane and moral plan for the day after. This should be the unrelenting cry of the American Zionist camp. And now we can put up the final photo. Technology, there it is. I support Israel and its government. This government never. Until then, the war goes on. I fear for the hostages and a government in Israel no sane person can abide. I stand by the sign I brought to the November rally on the Mall. Hamas out of Gaza, Bibi out of Israel. Od lo abda tikvatenu. We have not yet lost our hope. Shabbat shalom.